Hello and welcome to another episode of the Outdoor Gibbon podcast, episode 65. We, in this episode, are going to talk about wool, the whole process, taking a fleece from a sheep and turning it into a usable product, be that a wool product or even just a thread. But we'll come on to that shortly. June. How did we get to June? That 6 months of the year has just flown by. We were only what feels like talking about the beginning of the year, the end of the pheasant season and all the rest of it, and the stalking show. And now all of a sudden we're into June. We're almost at that longest day. And we all know what happens after that. The days get shorter again and we head off towards winter. That's when the fun time begins, I think. That's when everybody will be gearing up for those days when you can light the fire, cozy up at the end of a shoot day, drink a wee dram or have that nice glass of port. But let's hope it doesn't get there too quickly. We've got plenty to be going on with while the summer's here, and hopefully the weather stays for just a little bit longer so that we can just enjoy those summer months. But that rain has been much required. We're seeing that the ground has quite happily soaked that up quite nicely. Unfortunately, that has one major disadvantage, and that disadvantage is that all the weeds and the cover suddenly grows. So for the start of the roebuck season, it's been absolutely brilliant with very low cover. And I was just looking today, and it's amazing how much the weeds and the grasses have jumped, and now all of a sudden the roebucks have the natural ability to hide even better, and presenting a shot gets even harder and harder. So we recently ran a poll on the Insta feed, and we asked whether or not people would like to see the in-field type of recording, another one of those where the last one was done with Catherine and we recorded the entire day out deer stalking. The feedback has been massively positive, with a lot of people saying yes please. They really enjoyed that sort of podcast. So stick with me. There's a few ideas in the pipeline. One might be some dog training, another will be a stalk, but definitely something coming up in the future. As well as that, we have got some more great guests lined up for you. We are going to be talking all sorts of wonderful topics and hopefully something for everybody to enjoy. So let's get on with the podcast. So I chat here to Fiona, who runs a small independent wool mill at a friend's farm in Leicestershire. It was a spur of the moment type of recording. I was down there to go to the stalking show and just offhand said, "Do you want to do a podcast?" And she agreed. She doesn't want to hear it back. She doesn't like hearing her own voice, but I think it's absolutely brilliant. So if you do know her and you have listened to it, do give us some feedback and say that she should definitely listen. Anyway, let's get started. The Outdoor Gibbon podcast is proudly sponsored by the Shooting and Hunting Academy, an online training platform and UK registered learning provider that provides a host of accredited and nationally available courses and masterclasses delivered by leading industry experts. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Outdoor Gibbon podcast. Today I am joined by Fiona, and she runs a small-scale mill called the Shire Mill. How you doing?
Good, thank you. Yourself?
Very good. Thank you very much for this very impromptu recording.
You're welcome.
I kind of just bullied my friends where I was staying to say, can I get a recording with this lady that runs a mill? So tell us more about, obviously, first of all, you process wool.
We do, yes. I mean, mill covers quite a lot. We could be grinding wheat, but no. We process wool.
Exactly. So tell us a bit more about why, one, you wanted to start processing wool.
Yep. Okay. So wool it's a passion of mine.
Right.
That's what it comes down to. I have been a knitter since I was about 7. My grandma, I think probably just to keep me quiet and out of the way, put some knitting needles and some yarn in my hands and taught me how to knit. And then nothing for quite a long time. Picked it back up later on. And it's like a rabbit hole, basically. So you start with knitting and then you think, oh, maybe I could dye some yarn. Maybe I could spin some fleece. And you buy a spinning wheel and you buy some processing hand carders and things.
Okay.
And you just fall down the rabbit hole, and you love it. And it was always a bit of a dream to do that on a bigger scale.
Right.
So I'd seen mini mills. I knew they were a thing that was available, but they're very, very expensive. And that got put into the, if I win the lottery, maybe I could do that sort of bucket. And then a local mill who used to be in Derbyshire had decided to retire.
Okay.
And they put all their equipment up for sale. And because it was about 20 years old at that point, it was cheaper. Not going to say cheap, cheaper. And it was one of those, if I don't try this now, I will never get another opportunity.
Okay.
So I had to go for it. And very kindly, the friends that you mentioned said I could rent one of their buildings because I have nowhere at home to put it. The equipment's quite large. You had a quick tour this morning.
As I say, we've just seen sort of the mill, and these aren't the sort of things you're going to put in your lounge.
No, I think a lot of people do think I am there with a spinning wheel and a drum carder and doing it all very much sort of individually by hand. But it's not. It's a lot bigger than that.
These are sort of they're fairly substantial machines, gears, drives, motors.
The carder weighs 850 kilos. I know that because we had to move it. So the mill, as I said, was in Derbyshire, and we had to go and pick up all this equipment. Right. That was very stressful. It involved a loader hoisting this equipment that I just bought through the air onto the back of a truck, and then it flew down the motorway, and we had to get it in here.
And I was going to say, it's in a sort of a courtyard, through, it doesn't really look like it's got very big doors, through small doorways.
No, not through the doorway.
Okay.
We had to get permission to pull out a window and the wall, put the machinery in, again dangling off a loader and lots of sort of skid skates and stuff, and then rebuild the wall with the machinery inside. So that's going nowhere anytime soon because it is built into the building.
But that's how probably old mills in the back in the day were built. The machinery was probably fitted in on multiple floors.
Yeah, probably built in situ.
And that was it. So again, it kind of goes back. I think the reason for this podcast is I've talked on a couple of podcasts about using byproducts of animals, for example, wool, fleeces, skins, fur, and it's just died in the UK completely.
Yes. Yeah. There are pockets of it, which is good. That gives me hope. There are people that are championing it and working with it. There are some quite big brands that use British wool, but still not a lot.
Okay.
As an example, the wool clip, which is what you call all the shearing of your fleece, that would once upon a time have paid your rent for the year. So in the summer, you'd shear your sheep, you'd load them on the trailer, you'd sell those fleeces, and that would cover your rent.
Right.
Now, what you get paid does not cover the cost of shearing.
I was going to say most of the farms, they're not. They're just sitting there with packs of wool that. Yeah, it's better to stick it on the ground as like a
lot of people do. So it costs about £1.50 to have a sheep shorn.
Right.
And it depends on the breed, the condition, the colour, what you get back for it. You might get 50p, you might get £1 back. So it costs you more to have the fleece taken off the sheep, which you must do for welfare reasons. You can't just leave them.
Yep.
So it costs you more to have that shearing done than you will get back. You also have to deliver your wool to the depot that takes it. So for a lot of people, they will be spending more in the diesel to take their fleeces to the depot.
It's crazy.
Than they'll get back.
But I suppose that goes back to the fact that the UK, which had, especially the area we're in now, had absolutely fantastic number of mills, Derbyshire, Peak District, that area, that were producing some of the finest.
Yeah, wool was huge for many hundreds of years in the UK. Wool was massive. That was where, as a nation, our wealth really sat. But then synthetic fibres came in.
Yeah.
And they're very easy to look after. They're very cheap. They're mostly manufactured abroad. And people were sort of attracted by this convenience, which I think is where a lot of that kind of comes in.
I think so. And it's as you say, it's exactly that word that we hear all the time. It's cheap.
Yeah.
And wool is expensive because, well, we'll come on to the process in a minute, because you just explained it to me this morning. But you have a fantastic material that's basically it's pretty waterproof, it's breathable,
It's so good on so many levels that
it's a
they
super,
work
it's a
really
super
hard
fluff,
to
isn't it?
replicate it.
Yeah.
But it's right there. It already exists. You know, as you say, it can be fairly waterproof. It's warm. It's warm when it's wet, which a lot of synthetic materials are not. So it's got that going as well. It's a sustainable material. They're out there growing it right now, because we're not quite into shearing season for most people. Some people have started, but for most people, it's still growing. But it grows every year. It's a carbon sink. There's carbon stored in the wool. So if you've got a jumper that can last 50 years or more, it's a carbon store, and it's biodegradable at the end of its life. So you could take your woolly jumper that is no good anymore, and as long as it's a pure wool jumper, you could bury it in the ground and it will rot.
It will rot and disappear, and actually give back minerals and materials to the ground, so that your runner beans or whatever you
That's
there
exactly. And there is no other material that can do that. And they keep sort of trying to reproduce this with the kind of the very technical materials that you can buy to wear for whatever activities you're doing. And you just kind of think, but wool is right there. It already exists.
Do we see a trend of wool coming back to the high street, or is it still one of those things that people just think, oh, it's itchy, I'm not going to have that?
I think a lot of people still think it's itchy.
Right.
And that very much depends on the wool you're using. So there are hundreds of breeds. The UK has hundreds of breeds, but if you look globally, so many breeds. And some are amazingly skin soft, and you could wear them around your neck. And others are really not.
Okay.
So something like a Herdwick, which is a sheep a lot of people will be familiar with. They're very cute. You see them in the lakes. They are lovely, but they have a very coarse fleece.
Okay.
But it's about using the right fleece for the right job.
Right.
So Herdwick is amazing for things like carpets.
Right. Okay.
And I've seen it used in suits as well, because it's very hard wearing, and you've got a layer between the wool and your skin. But then there's lots of other fleeces that you would put next to your skin that are soft. So it's about using the right breed for the job you're looking for, and not just going, oh, I want a wool sweater, because you might end up with anything.
Yeah.
So you would want to be sort of a little bit specific about it. Shetland is a good example of some very nice soft fleece.
Okay.
We have Bluefaced Leicester, which is lovely. Merino is one a lot of people hear about.
Yes. Yeah.
You don't see as much British merino.
I was going to say that's more sort of further afield, the merino one, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of Australian merino and South American merino.
South American. It's one of those things, that's something that you do see a lot of, because people like merino socks, merino base layers, because of the natural ability for the breathability, the natural wicking and everything about it. So that seems to be there, but that's not obviously helping the British farmer.
It's not, but those are properties of wool. Those are not properties of merino. The thing with the merino is it's very smooth.
Okay.
It's got very fine fibres. It's got a lot to do with the thickness of the individual hairs.
Okay.
And the number of scales on it.
Right.
So this is probably more detail than you wanted.
No, keep going.
If you watch television and you see an advert for conditioner, and they'll show you a diagram of a hair very close in, and it'll have the scales, and they will be going on about how their wonderful conditioner smooths these and makes your hair lovely and shiny.
Yes. Yeah.
Wool has the same kind of scales.
Okay.
But some fleeces have more, some are bigger, some are coarser, and then the individual fibre itself is thicker. That will be, perhaps, shall we say, a little bit more scratchy potentially.
Right.
If it's smoother, if it's thinner, if the scales are smaller, then it will feel softer, it will feel less prickly. So that is all down to the breed.
Oh wow. Okay. That's really interesting, because obviously, some people will look out the window and there'll be a sheep probably now standing in the field behind their house, and they'll go, it's a sheep.
It is a sheep.
It makes wool.
Yes.
But then you've just explained that particular breed, or whatever that sheep is, it could have, there's multiple different types of the fleece you're going to get off it that you can process down, so you can get a core. That is brilliant. That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
There we go.
Right. So so say that somebody's now shorn their sheep.
Yep.
And we're not talking like Wallace and Gromit where you chuck the sheep in at one end and the process happens in a woolly jumper.
We are not. It's not quite that magical.
Okay. So they've shorn the sheep. They've got this bag of raw fleece.
Yep.
And they then send that to you.
Well, before they send it to me,
Right.
what I ask them to do, or require them to do really, is to do what we call skirting.
Okay.
So you lay the fleece out flat and you take off all the really mucky bits.
Right, okay.
I tend to describe it as, if you wouldn't want it in the yarn, take it out the fleece.
Okay.
So obviously round the back end of a sheep,
Yeah.
there's quite often a lot of muck.
Yep.
So take all of that off. You'll also have bits quite often around the neck that are felted.
Okay.
Take that off. Around the edges, a lot of them have quite hairy legs, especially if you're looking at the native breed.
Right.
Those hairs will be thicker, they'll be coarser. If those go into your yarn, it will make a more prickly yarn.
Okay.
So to get the best yarn, I get them to spend, it can just be 5 minutes, picking out the best bits of fleece.
And obviously picking out the sticks and the twigs.
Yeah,
all the
sticks and twigs and things. There's no point sending those because obviously you don't want those in your yarn. Things like sticks, I can pull those out. But if there's a lot of hay, a lot of grass seeds, things like that, you do end up with tiny bits of those in the yarn.
Okay.
So if it's not in the fleece to start with, you'll get a better yarn.
You get a better... Okay, right, okay.
So before they send it to me, I ask them to do that. But yes, then they bag it up.
Right.
They book it in first, I should say.
Okay, right.
Just in case anybody starts thinking they're just going to post me lots of bags of yarn, book it in first. And then it comes in to me. We take in by post or courier. So we take from Scotland, we take from Cornwall. We do also have quite a lot of local customers.
Okay.
If they're local or passing by, they might drop it off in person, which is lovely because then I can talk about sheep at them. Okay. They can have the tour, which is wonderful. So they bring it in and I've got these lovely bags of fleece to work with.
Right.
We sort out what they'd like it back as. So they could have it back as roving if they want to spin it themselves, which is like a nice, clean, fluffy stuff ready for spinning.
Yep.
They might want it back as yarn, and then there's various thicknesses of yarn they can have back. So we have a chat about what they want it back as. They might not know, so I'll talk them through it and we'll work it out. Fleece come in, and then they are washed is the first step. So we need to get the dirt, the grease, all of that out, so they're nice and clean.
Now, this washing process you talk about, is this where you stick it in a washing machine, or is this a very manual, you do each one, you're shoving it in and out of a bucket kind of thing?
Closer to the second.
Okay.
So they go through, depending on how clean the fleece is,
right,
about 6 stages of washing.
Wow. Okay.
So they'll go through a nice cold soak overnight, gets lots of dirt out, and then they'll have hot washes with soap and washes without soap to rinse them off.
Okay, and is it a specific type of soap? Because obviously you always get a woolen jumper and you read the packet and it says hand wash only, and obviously be careful of temperatures, things like that. So is there something special with the washing process?
We have a scouring detergent.
Okay.
But if someone's doing it small scale at home, when I was doing that just to do some hand spinning, I used to quite often use washing up liquid.
Okay.
Because it's a degreaser. And what you're looking for is to take the grease out of the fleece.
And the grease, and those greases are just the natural greases that occur on the hair.
Yeah,
and things
it's
like
what keeps the sheep waterproof. It's the lanolin. So they use it for waterproofing.
Right.
But we want it taken out before we start spinning because it will gum the machines up.
Right, okay.
So we need it to be nice and clean and to get rid of the dirt and everything as well. So we've got lovely clean fleeces. And then we set them out to dry. As far as possible, we air dry our fleeces.
Okay.
Which this time of year it's just getting warmer, so much easier job. In winter, that can take quite a long time.
So does that mean in the summer you can process more than in the winter because of air drying?
Certainly get it through the washing process quicker.
Okay.
But there is a limit to how much I can physically do as one person running the machines.
Okay.
So it's a little bit easier to do that prep stage when the weather's nice because it will sort of proper height of summer. It will dry overnight.
Okay, right.
But it's much easier when it's nice and warm.
Okay.
So from there, it starts going through the machines.
Okay.
Do you want a description of each one?
Let's do the process,
Okay,
because
we'll
at the end of the day,
the steps.
you just showed me through the mill. We can't record in the mill with the machines running because
Very
literally
loud.
it would be
It would just be machine noise.
It would just be machine noise. So I've had a quick run through, but we'll go through it again for the listeners so they can kind of get that process.
Yeah. Okay. And there are lots and lots of pictures of our processing stages.
Okay.
If people want to see them,
I will put links for that so that
fabulous.
you can have a look.
That's great. So the first machine we go through is the fibre separator,
Okay.
which fluffs the fleece out. So it goes in looking like a sheep fleece, albeit a clean one, and it comes out looking like a big fluffy cloud.
Okay, yeah.
So it's opened the fibres up, it's separated them out, and the bit that you wouldn't have been able to see because it's underneath is a certain amount of things like vegetation and coarse fibres will fall out downwards.
Okay.
So it will take those out up to a point. If there's a lot of vegetation, some is going to make it through, but it will take a little bit of that out.
Fluffy cloud with leaves is a possibility.
Fluffy cloud with some leaves is possibility.
Right.
But quite a lot of it will fall out underneath.
Right, okay.
So that's made it into that nice fibre.
You've now got
ready
something
to start processing.
Okay. And is that must be, you were saying about having to put small amounts onto the conveyor belt. So you're actually manually having to process this to put it in there. So again, that's a labour intensive job.
Yeah. So I will stand next to it as it's running. I will fluff the fleece out a little bit. I don't just throw it in and wait for it to come out.
Right.
I put it in on the belt in handfuls.
Okay.
So that will go in. If you put too much in, it just won't process.
Right.
Well. So I'll sit and supervise that. Stand, usually, to be fair. From there, it'll go into the carder. Anybody who is listening who has done any kind of spinning will perhaps be familiar with drum carders or hand carders, and what they do. They brush the fibres,
right,
align them to a degree, and produce something that's ready to start spinning.
Okay, that was that small sort of 1 inch wide, like
fibre sausage.
Fibre sausage coming at the end of
it. That's roving.
Okay, right.
So, as you say, it looks like a sausage, but it's 50 yards long.
Right, okay.
So the carder will take that fluffy cloud, brush through it, and align those fibres to make that roving fluffy sausage. Okay. So then it's in a position, it's about ready to spin.
And you said that some people just, that's all they want done. They'll buy they'll take their roving away.
Yeah.
They'll go home, they'll spin it themselves, or they'll use it for, I think, felting.
Felting, yeah. So that's what some people like to do. They like to spin or they like to felt, but to do the cleaning and preparation process at home it's quite labour intensive. You end up using the bathtub, which is usually not very popular with your partner. Buckets in the garden are preferable, but I know people do use the bathtub. And it's just quite a big, messy job.
I was going to say, it sounds like a messy
If you've got a big garden, fine. But if you haven't, or maybe if you just don't want to do it, which is fair enough. So they'll send it to us and we will turn it into roving that they can have back, and then they can spin it themselves or felt with it. Some people have it back like that to sell on. So they have customers that would like to spin their sheep, but they don't want to buy a raw fleece from them, so they might buy some roving instead.
Okay. And then, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then, so now we've got these, they look like giant cardboard tubes.
Yeah,
now,
the cans.
The cans. Now they're full of roving. So what's the next process? Okay,
so the next process, we combine two of those together.
Okay.
We put it through something called a draw frame.
Right.
It teases those fibre sausages out and combines two.
Okay.
We'll then take the output from that and do it again.
So when you're combining the two, are you you're reducing or making it stronger?
So the strength will be the same.
Right.
It's mixing them, essentially. By the time you've done that twice, you've got 4 batches of carder output sat next to each other.
Okay.
And that will make a nice, consistent fibre stream for the machines. That's what the machines like. They like consistency.
Okay.
So they like a nice, smooth fibre to feed in to spin. If there's lots of thick bits and thin bits, you'll get breakages as you're trying to spin.
Right.
If it's a human that is doing the spinning by hand, then we can adapt.
Yes.
But the machinery can't do...
I was going to say, the machinery doesn't have the same sense as the human being watching it and spinning it. We have the human brain. We go, oh, it's a thin bit, we'll add a bit more. Whereas the machine is just like, well, I just process this. I don't know what I'm doing.
Exactly. So I can do a certain degree with the settings on the machinery, but the machine assumes what's being fed in is consistent.
Right.
And a human doesn't need that, which is why they are obviously superior.
So just going back a step, setting this all up, is there a recipe, or is it trial and error? Does it change with fleeces? Do you have to spend a lot of time adjusting machines?
So it's a little bit of all of those.
Okay.
When we bought the machinery, I had 2 days of tuition on the machines before we picked them up.
Right.
That was not really enough, as I learned afterwards, because there was so much to learn. The first few are quite straightforward. So the fibre separator, feed it in, not too fast. The carder, we weigh it in, out comes the roving. When you get to the spinner, there's a lot to learn, a lot of different settings, a lot of subtleties that will change. And then because fleece is an organic material, every fleece is different.
Right.
So every breed is different. And you can say, okay, well, I know the fleece I've got coming through is a long wool.
Okay.
And obviously I look at it. And as I'm handling it and doing the first stages, that's very useful because I get to learn quite a lot about the fleece. So I can see the lengths of the fibre, I can see what it's like, I can see how it's behaving. But one long wool is not necessarily the same as another. And individual sheep within that might be different. And if you bring in crossbreeds as well, they can be different again. But actually they can be really good because they can take the best of both.
Okay.
So every single fleece requires a little bit of, okay, I know this is probably the sort of settings that I'm looking for.
The Outdoor Gibbon podcast is proudly sponsored by the Shooting and Hunting Academy. Through the Academy, shooters, hunters, and those involved in the use of firearms can gain an in-depth and unique level of training that enables them to shoot better, behave more effectively in the field, up their strike rates, as well as learning new skills. Crucially, those new to deer stalking, the Academy also offers the Proficient Deer Stalker Certificate Level 1, the PDS-1, a deer management certificate that is nationally recognised and accredited both by LANTRA and UK Rural Skills. Visit the Shooting and Hunting Academy to find out more. Let's get back to the show.
But let's test it, alter it as needed, hit the sweet spot that it will run happily.
You kind of, all of this kind of says exactly why that we went away to synthetic fibre, because you set the machine going to produce nylon,
yes,
and it wangs out nylon, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, bigger machines, bigger processing are a little bit different to my tiny bits of equipment. I
wouldn't say your bits of equipment are tiny, but they must be.
For comparison, so my spinner has 8 what we call heads. So it spins 8 strands at a time.
Right.
The sort of the next size up of mill in the UK is spinning 24.
Okay.
So they are working at 3 times the speed. So in the world of mills,
but surely 3
we
times
are tiny.
That then means the manpower. Looking at it, you do all of this individually. If you were in a commercial mill, you'd have 1, maybe 2 operators per machine, I'm assuming?
Probably not. They'd probably work at a similar sort of rate.
Oh, really?
Yes. Everything would be scaled up.
Right.
But the manpower would only be slightly scaled up.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Once you've got the settings, it can hopefully run quite happily. So you do those settings, but the all 8 or all 24 or all 120, if you're running that, would be running the same.
Right, okay.
So I can't do 2 batches on the spinner at one time that are different.
Yes, of course.
So it will be running those 8. And once I've done all that sort of fiddling about and finding the sweet spot, so it will run quite happily.
Yeah, you have to do it as a batch, but can you put, say somebody sends you 10 fleeces?
Yes, I can combine them into one big batch of 10 fleeces.
So you don't have to just do like 1 fleece, make a bag of wool.
I don't have to, but we do we can do that.
Okay.
Which is where we have quite a lot of customers who've got named sheep.
Right.
So we will get Dave and we will get Ron and we will get Steve, and they'll come in a bag with the names on. And I love that because I love to kind of know who we're working with. And they will get back Steve yarn.
Right.
That they can make a jumper with.
Okay.
But we do also have people who would like a bigger batch. So they perhaps have half a dozen fleeces and they'd like all of those combined, which we can do as long as the fleeces are similar.
Okay.
So as I said, even within a breed, it can vary. So you might get some that is half the length of another. So what I would do is I would say, these aren't going to work very well together. Let's make a batch that is the longer stuff and a batch that is the shorter stuff, and we'll process them as 2 batches. You'll get 2 lots of yarn.
Okay.
The yarns themselves will be quite similar, but those fleeces would perhaps not have blended very well together for our machinery.
I see.
So we can do that, but I would always sort of look at the fleeces and work out what...
I suppose that gives you the ability as a small scale operation to actually give a higher quality product back.
I hope so.
Yeah. Whereas obviously if you were processing tens of thousands of fleeces a day, you have less.
That's a very different process.
Yeah.
I say different process. Actually, the stages are the same, but we're talking much bigger equipment. I would imagine it's more tolerant of a bit of variation than the smaller equipment.
Right. But do you think the yarn would be coming out as probably as good a quality?
I mean, I'm going to say yes, because I've worked with a lot of beautiful yarn
from
mills of all sizes. I think what we have, because we focus on small batches, I will take from a kilo, which is a fleece, up to about 15.
Right.
So small batches is what we do. And it means we can give that sort of that level of service. We can look through and we can say, let's make 2 batches. Do you want an individual named sheep?
Yeah.
How would you like it? And they can have the best yarn for their wool back that we can make.
So we've just got the last part of the process. I think we touched on the spinner. So you've got the spinner, and now that's producing bobbins of
singles.
Yep.
So that's 1 strand.
Okay.
So we've taken the fluffy sausage.
Yep.
We've teased it out. We've put twist in it.
Okay.
We've filled a bobbin with that. So we've got these lovely bobbins full. From there, it goes to the plier.
But you said something about your machine was sensitive and it lives in a tent, doesn't it?
Only in the winter.
Only in the winter. Okay.
It's very pampered.
Well, we need to tell people about this, because you walk into this room and there's all these machines, and then you've got this.
There's a gazebo.
There's a gazebo.
There is.
And inside that, there is another machine.
There is. It doesn't like the cold and the damp. And as you said, we're in a machine on a courtyard, and in winter it gets very, very cold.
Right.
And the machine does not like it. It doesn't like to be cold. It doesn't like to be damp, which we found out the first winter. We knew that they didn't like to be too cold, but it was a little bit of a surprise when I turned it on. It went into overdrive and started trying to run at maximum speed.
Right.
Turned it off very quickly, because that's not ideal. That's going to break the machine. I had a look through, took the side panel off, got the electrician in, came to the conclusion it just didn't like to be cold and damp. So from November to May, it lives in a gazebo with a little heater. Okay. Very pampered.
I was going to say that's very pampered for a machine, absolutely. Yep. But especially living on this farm, we are sat in a kitchen at the moment, and it's colder in here than it is outdoors.
Yes, that doesn't surprise me at all.
This farm is not. They don't heat it very often, so the fire does come on. But I can understand why the sheds that you're in are just as cold.
They are very chilly. So the tent will be up until, I normally take it down 1st of May. No particular reason, but that seems like a good choice.
Right. Okay. And then obviously now we take those singles and we're now going to combine those.
Yeah, we're going to twist them together.
Right.
So we're going to ply them.
Okay.
Which is the term for that. Usually either 2 or 3, depending on the yarn we're making.
Right.
The more you twist together, the thicker the yarn gets.
Okay.
So we can adjust the end thickness both at the spinner and at plying. So I can make the spinner produce a much thinner yarn or a thicker yarn, depending on the end result. And then we get to the plier and we twist those together.
So your average customer is what sort of return do they want normally?
So it tends, it does vary. We get a lot of double knitting weight, which is it's a fairly typical for sweaters, hats, scarves, that kind of thing. I get some 4-ply weight.
Right.
So this is going to get a bit confusing and involved.
Okay. There you go for it.
Ready to have your mind blown. So when spinning became mechanical, they used to spin one very fine thickness of yarn.
Yes.
That was the only thickness.
Okay.
So now we can vary. We can make thinner yarn or we can make thicker yarn. But they used to just make one thickness. And if you wanted a thicker yarn, you would ply more of those together.
Yes.
Exactly as we still do.
Right.
But because you only had one thickness, you'd get 2-ply yarn, 4-ply yarn, 6-ply yarn, 8-ply yarn.
Okay.
And that's what they'd be called. So you could order some 4-ply yarn and it would be made with 4 strands twisted together.
Right.
Now we can change that initial thickness.
Okay.
So you can twist 2 strands together, but the finished result has the same width as a 4-ply.
Okay. Right.
However, in the English language, we still call it 4-ply yarn.
But it's only got 2 plies.
But it's a 2-ply, 4-ply.
Right.
The others have names. So we have double knit, we have Aran weight. So we use other words for the different thicknesses, but 4-ply has remained as 4-ply.
Right.
So that can get nice and confusing.
I was going to say, yeah.
Because it's a 2-ply, 4-ply.
Yeah, so, ordering that over the internet could be a real problem.
Yes, it can.
Right, okay. And then that's the end of the process? That's ready to go? Or...
So that will still be wound onto bobbins at that point. From there, I will put it through the skein winder, which makes it into the big loops that you will typically see yarn purchased as. I will twist them into a nice finish.
Okay.
We can also put it onto cones. So if it's going to weavers or machine knitters, they tend to have it back on cone instead of in the skeins. Some people will call those hanks. It's a bit of a regional variation.
Okay, yep.
But yeah, so we can do it as either the skeins or onto cones.
And at this point, that is exactly the natural colour that it came in with that sheep.
Yeah, we don't do any dyeing. So it goes back the colour that it came in. I suppose it's not really a variation to that. We can blend colours together.
Okay.
So one that is quite fun to work with is if I have any Jacob sheep fleeces in.
Right.
Jacobs are spotty.
Okay.
So they have big brown and white splotches. So what you can do with Jacob fleeces is you can pick out the brown bits.
Right.
You can pick out the white bits. And you can have the bits that are a bit of brown and a bit of white. And as those go through the machines, the brown bits will stay brown.
Right.
You process the white separately, that will stay white. But the bits that are some brown, some white, as it goes through the machines, those will all be mixed together and you'll get a really nice sort of heathery grey colour.
Okay.
So it is still a natural colour, but it is sort of mixed together a little bit.
That's quite clever.
And then with those 3, you can twist them together, which makes a really nice effect. So you could have white twisted with brown or with the grey, or you could have it plied with itself. So you just get a grey yarn, a black yarn and a white yarn.
Oh, I see.
So Jacob is quite fun to play with, and you get a lot of variation on the natural colour. But yes, it all goes out as natural colours.
Brilliant. So let's go right back again. So how long, let's say somebody sends you a fleece, how long does the process on average, because obviously drying times and things like that take?
So I timed this approximately. I reckon for a 2-kilo batch coming in, it takes about 16 hours of processing. That doesn't include drying time.
Right.
And it doesn't include chatting to people on emails and things like that. That's the processing.
That's still a long time and what would 2 kilos, if you put that as yarn, what does that make? Does that make you one jumper? Does that make you a woolly hat, a pair of socks?
So we reckon on between 50 and 60% return.
Okay.
It can vary. If you've got those Herdwicks with a lot of very coarse fibre that will come out, you might only get 40%. If you send me a beautifully clean fleece, you might get 70% back.
Right, okay.
So if you sent 2 kilos, hopefully you'll get at least 1 kilo of yarn back.
Right.
A jumper, probably about 600 grams, depending on the size of the person, the style of the jumper. Something like an Aran jumper with lots of cabling will take more yarn.
Yeah.
But you're probably looking sort of 600-800 grams for a jumper.
So potentially a jumper and a hat for one sheep. That's not bad.
Potentially. It depends on the sheep. If you've got a little Shetland, you might only get a kilo.
You might get a woolly hat.
You might get a woolly hat and a pair of socks. If you've got sort of the bigger breeds of sheep, you might get 3 kilos of fleece off them.
Right. Okay.
So it does, again, vary very much by breed.
It's still, exactly as we were speaking at the beginning, you can understand why the process has slowly died out, because you've just said there, you're small scale and it takes 16 hours.
Yeah.
The big scale stuff must take, it might be slightly quicker, but it's still the same process.
It's still the same process. The reason I can do it and the reason I can make it viable is because those 16 hours will overlap.
Okay.
So I will have something going through the fibre separator and something going through the carder and something being spun, potentially.
Right. Okay.
So that 2 kilos will take 16 hours of processing, but there will be 3 things going through at the time, potentially.
6 kilos.
Potentially. Or it might be the same fleece, but it's sat at 3 different points. So the one I've got running at the minute that you saw when we walked around, that's one batch. It's about 7 kilos. So that is currently on all the machines at the same time.
Right. Okay.
It wouldn't be possible for me to do it if I just took a fleece, put it through a machine, then moved on to the next machine.
I was going to say, you'd be there forever.
I would.
It would be...
Well, 16 hours.
16 hours. And that's not... Yeah, and that's 16 hours spread out through a few days. You don't just stand in there for 16 hours.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay. So, yeah, I can kind of see... Yeah, you scale it up. You can understand why we shipped it all out to the Far East and places like that to do it.
You can. There are economies of scale. Bigger machines will potentially go faster. They can have more capacity. As I said, they may need a little bit more staffing, but it will not be in direct proportion. Yep. So you might need 2 members of staff, but you're doing 10 times the amount of fleece. But it is still quite labour intensive.
Well, yeah, and that probably explains why that to buy a wool product you pay more for it, but at least you're getting a natural fibre that
will last.
That will last, and has had somebody almost give it a bit of love and care and attention while it's being made, rather than some faceless machine that just spews out threads without
threads of plastic.
Pretty much, exactly. Yeah. It really does go to show, because I think. Yeah, it just follows on. It would be lovely to see a mill start back up, a big scale mill start back up in the UK.
There are some. We're not without any. There are a few,
but they must be sort of, what would you call them? Not niches, but
fairly specialist. They are, yes.
Yeah,
but they will do sort of 1,000 kilos, which I can't even consider large batches. And if people come to us with larger batches, I will always point them to a more appropriate mill who can help them.
And those mills, are they spread out throughout the UK, or are they still focused in certain areas?
Because there's only a handful. They are reasonably spread.
Right.
So there's one down in Cornwall.
Okay.
There's sort of Halifax, Yorkshire still has a sort of there's a bit of a wool base there still, not in any way like there used to be. And then there's some of the smaller mills up in Scotland as well.
Right. Yeah. Well, as we say, I think most of the most important product that the UK is known for is like the tartans and tweed. Well, Scotland's known for its tartans and tweeds. They make I think we were chatting about this on another recording. They make their way onto things like Fashion Week. Tweed, everybody wants tweed, but tweed was created for the guys, the keepers, and all the rest of it.
Because it's such a good fabric.
Because it
keeps you warm.
Yeah, warm. You get wet, so you end up walking off the hill weighing twice as much, but you're still warm.
Yeah.
And in some cases dry.
Yeah.
Because actually it's shedding that water off naturally. So it's one of those things. If you can support and things like that, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of I think it's a fundamental thinking change that would need to happen, that people need to be prepared to pay more money to get the better quality product and to see the value in it, rather than you can go to a high street shop and buy 2 beanies for £1.50.
Yeah, I think that was the thing though, wasn't it? People, once upon a time, it was you took your wool in, it came back. There was somebody that processed it, made cloth, made yarn, whatever from it, and those clothing was made to last. You repaired it. Socks were darned, hats were repaired, jumpers were fixed, and it carried on until it literally reached the end of its life. Now, I'll chuck it away.
That's it. It's so disposable.
Yeah.
Because it's so cheap. Because you've paid £1.50 for 2 beanies.
Yeah.
Oh, I've lost it. Oh, I don't like it anymore. Oh, it's stretched out of shape.
It's
People
the wrong
will just be like,
colour, yeah.
it's the wrong colour. It doesn't match my jacket anymore. And it's just considered so disposable.
Yeah.
And then it's more of a problem because when it's disposed of, it doesn't biodegrade. Whereas if it's wool, it would
You've
at
already
least
said that.
biodegrade.
It breaks down.
But
Yeah.
you've got these beanies. I feel like I'm picking on the beanies here, but it's quite a good example.
There's obviously one on the table just
yeah,
here.
of course. Sorry. But they, they're quite a good example, that people will buy one of those for 75p and treat it as a disposable item. But the fundamental shift you need is for people to see, hang on, if I spent a bit more, I got a good quality wool one, preferably British wool, but baby steps.
Yeah.
You get a better item. It lasts. It has all those performance benefits because it will be warmer. It will be a better product, and it will last, and ultimately it would biodegrade at the end of its life. So it is all round a better package, but you have to find a way to convince people to buy that instead of a 75p hat.
You say that though, but then you go to the next extreme because I saw an advert for some, I think, Scandinavian brand making woolen hats made by families locally and all the rest.
I've seen that advert.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the brand, but I have also seen that advert recently.
But then you go and look at the price of the hat, the beanie they want, and it's £75 starting price. And you just like, wow. But then I suppose when you take everything into account that we've just spoken about, the processing, the wool, all the rest of it, and that hat potentially will last a long time.
Yep.
It could well be £75 well spent.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, okay, that makes more sense now that if you've got all those steps and there are lots of different people who are benefiting from the income from that, you are providing a community with support.
Yeah, I'm getting a really nice hat.
Yeah, no, 100%. Very interesting. Yeah, it's a lot to think about because I think we also spoke about, just when we first touched on this, we were talking about obviously the UK at the moment seems to ship a lot of its fleeces, skins, everything like that in shipping containers and send them to the Far East. Lanolin extraction, and I think you mentioned that reason lanolin was extracted was it's fed to.
I'm told it's used as a food for prawns.
Well,
so I'm sorry for anyone who eats prawns and is put off by that. But I am told that's what a lot of the lanolin is used from.
Well, therefore,
from the fleece.
You need to buy wild prawns that aren't.
Yes, that aren't fed lanolin.
Exactly. So there you go. But no, it's one of those things, and I think it's a topic that the country keeps pushing on and banging on about. We need to be sustainable and use green products.
Yep.
Well, why aren't we using wool more? Because at the end of the day, it's a green product.
But that sort of goes back round in a circle because you have to persuade people to spend £75 on a hat.
Yeah.
Because you've got to create the demand to use what we've got before people are able to. But then it's a circular problem because people can't afford to invest quite often without the market, but then the market won't exist because nobody can see a lovely wool hat available, and then it's just sort of struggles to get going.
I think we've had probably the last 30, 40, maybe 50 years has become, disposable stuff is much easier.
Absolutely.
And we've gone away from this because probably look back to my grandparents, and they will have bought things that they will have looked after and cherished. Like you've had the old wool coats and things like that, jumpers that would last. They'd have had them for years.
Yeah, you would pass them on to somebody else if you were done with them, because they would still last, which is not something that people even consider for the most part.
It's not something you find nowadays. If it does a few years, you've got good value for money out of it, you feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that sort of fundamental shift, I think, is you've got to persuade people to step away from the cheap but disposable back to it's more expensive, but it's got the quality, it will last, but it's kind of breaking that mindset is the problem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's the big thing, isn't it? It's it's not just about the quick fix. It's look at it from a long-term perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, fantastic. So I'm going to put up all the links because I've got a card here which has got everything on it. I'll pop some photos up as well.
Yeah, lovely.
And but thank you very much for.
Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. And yeah, thanks a lot. Well, there you go. That's a really interesting topic. The utilisation of wool, a product that probably the country was brought up on, and there were mills all over the place, and now it's reduced to a few smaller mills, and obviously people like Fiona who are doing a very small scale milling process, but actually producing a fantastic product at the end of it that can be used. It just saves wastage. I think we really do need to look at some things within the UK, all of these deer skins that I heard a comment the other day from a game dealer. There is no market for them. There has to be a market for deer skins. Surely the material is fantastic. So if anybody knows of where we can get rid of deer skins or how we can use them or turn them into something else, get in touch. It would be really interesting. It's probably another topic to talk about. Just one more request. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do go and leave us some feedback. It keeps it current and active in the charts and allows people to also find it. Do follow us on all the socials. Obviously, we're on Insta, Facebook, TikTok, you name it. We're on there. Go and have a look, like and subscribe. We've also got a YouTube channel where you can find all of the podcasts. You may well be listening there. But yeah, please share this podcast as well, far and wide, with all your friends, even if they're not into the hunting world. Let's get the word out there. Thank you very much, and we'll catch you on the next one.